The Strait of Hormuz faces a blockade, now that recent Geneva diplomacy has failed. This escalating tension follows the breakdown of negotiations, leaving the strategic waterway's future uncertain. Both sides have accused the other of violating their shaky ceasefire, further imperiling diplomatic efforts to end the war. For months, diplomats waited to see if back-channel talks would produce a lasting deal. This period of uncertainty preceded the scheduled negotiations in Geneva. Diplomats hoped a new deal would end the U.S. naval blockade on Iranian ports, finally reopening the Strait of Hormuz to global shipping lanes. This critical maritime passage remains essential for international trade stability. We know the basic framework of this deal, even though the specific private terms stayed out of the public record. Middle Eastern nations are building local alliances now, following the strategic independence established by the Abraham Accords. This shift toward regional autonomy follows the diplomatic framework set by the Abraham Accords. Regional players now follow shared interests, moving away from traditional superpower influence to build their own independent paths. China was a part of the GPOA and remains an important participant to the agreement. This ongoing role persists as the international community navigates the complexities of the nuclear framework. Without a revived framework, a power vacuum exists alongside missing rules for nuclear oversight, leaving the international community without clear protocols for monitoring. As military confrontation escalates, fears of severe maritime and energy disruptions threaten the global economy. Tensions spiked because neither side would drop their demands, leaving the room stuck in a deadlock of deep-seated distrust that stalled all meaningful progress. Diplomats negotiated while soldiers began fighting directly on the front lines. Last Thursday, Iran fired ballistic missiles at a U.S. airbase located in Kuwait, marking a significant escalation in regional tensions. Iran claimed the target was a U.S. military base used for strikes in Bandar Abbas, a major Iranian port city. The official NVIDIA logo accompanies reports that the US military carried out limited attacks in southern Iran, according to a US official. Bandar Abbas sits by the Strait of Hormuz, placing it in a high-tension zone for the Middle East. Both sides have accused each other of violating their shaky ceasefire following recent military strikes. The United States attacked the Islamic Republic, and Iran subsequently fired a missile at an American airbase in Kuwait. He added that these specific military moves clearly break the current ceasefire agreement, undermining the fragile peace. Speaking from the White House, President Donald Trump refused to yield to external pressures, maintaining a firm stance against international demands. Pakistan's mediation with the U.S. is in a difficult course, as a deadlock remains over the issue of enriched uranium, according to an Iranian top diplomat. Things fell apart after Tasnim, an URGK-affiliated agency, reported Iran stopped all indirect negotiations. This sudden halt followed escalating threats regarding the potential closure of the Strait of Hormuz. The agency reported that Iran had suspended all exchanges with the US via mediators, with the decision made over what it described as the continuing crimes of Israel in Lebanon. Iran's negotiators stated they won't talk until Israel leaves occupied Lebanese territories. They also demand all military operations against Hezbollah stop before any diplomatic talks can restart. This condition remains a critical prerequisite for any potential negotiation process. The announcement sent global oil markets into a tailspin, with crude prices jumping more than 7% within hours. Global crude prices jumped over 7% in just a few hours following the announcement. This sudden dramatic spike shook the entire energy market. Oil prices jumped because military tensions involving Iran in the Gulf region resurfaced, creating significant market uncertainty. These failed talks broke the current Middle East security architecture. The collapse shows that the existing regional stability agreements are no longer functioning. Both sides have accused the other of violating a shaky ceasefire through new strikes, as military tensions in the Gulf intensify. If Iran actually closes the Strait of Hormuz, global oil markets will crash, triggering a massive worldwide economic recession. Crude prices jumped more than 7% within hours as Iran suspended negotiations with the U.S. and threatened to seal the Strait of Hormuz. The U.S.-Iran negotiations and the Lebanon conflict are linked, proving that no part of this region exists in isolation. Expect more proxy-style conflicts and direct strikes now that the diplomatic safety valve is gone, increasing the risk of widespread escalation. Because Iran tied negotiations to Israeli strikes in Lebanon, several separate wars are now preventing any real peace talks from happening. Without a structured diplomatic forum, we no longer have the main way to lower nuclear tensions. Without the Geneva framework, no neutral ground remains to verify enrichment levels or negotiate any sanctions relief. Without proper international oversight, sudden unilateral moves might trigger immediate, large-scale military responses from opposing forces. This breakdown replaces verbal negotiation with physical deterrence, making military presence the only way to communicate power. The Gulf faces real, escalating risks now. Without a formal deal, maritime security depends on nothing but sheer luck and unpredictable geopolitical shifts. Naval patrols are getting more aggressive, which increases the risk of accidental skirmishes in contested waters. Without a clear diplomatic roadmap, regional neighbors cannot prepare for the long-term instability this conflict will likely cause. The collapse of these talks has fueled a narrative of mistrust surrounding nuclear policy and failed negotiations. When these high-level talks collapse, nations everywhere start doubting if current arms control treaties actually work anymore. Uptown, this sets a dangerous precedent, making unilateral moves look better than working together globally. The escalating Iran war threatens the global economy with severe maritime and energy disruptions. Shipping companies might reroute vessels around the Cape of Good Hope, making global supply chains much longer. These logistics changes will further strain manufacturing sectors across the globe right now. This breakdown shows how mistrust and disputes over nuclear policy and Hormuz control shape the narrative of failed talks. Violations of a shaky ceasefire and new strikes between Iran and the US are further imperiling diplomatic efforts to end the war. Mixing nuclear threats with regional wars means we should expect long, messy, and multi-front instability ahead. With the suspension of all indirect negotiations, both sides continue to violate their shaky ceasefire. With diplomatic talks now officially dead, expect significantly higher military budgets and the implementation of more concrete coastal defenses to secure the vulnerable border regions. We no longer use diplomacy to prevent regional friction. Now, we just try to manage the fallout when it happens. Failed Geneva talks change how we calculate energy security. Without diplomatic limits, the risk of targeted infrastructure attacks is now much higher. Fears of prolonged disruptions to energy flows continue to support the market's risk premium. The suspension of indirect negotiations via mediators has left diplomatic efforts in a difficult course as deadlock remains over critical issues. Without structured dialogue, we rely on volatile, unverified channels. This makes it much easier to misread actual military posturing during a crisis. Without a negotiated settlement, countries are shifting toward defensive posturing. Coastal states must now prioritize rapid naval mobilization to protect their borders. The collapse of these talks leaves the international community with fewer options besides direct military action. Without a formal agreement, no predictable maritime corridor exists. This instability will likely force navies to increase their defensive deployments in the region. Since these talks failed, future negotiations will begin from a much more hostile baseline. Rebuilding diplomatic trust will cost a massive amount of political capital. Without a formal, transparent inspection framework, nobody can verify compliance with the agreed terms. This leaves unilateral sanctions as the only remaining tool left to enforce the rules and ensure accountability. Renewed tensions have sent oil prices surging, as Iran has threatened to fully seal the Strait of Hormuz. Iran has suspended all indirect negotiations with the United States, while both sides accuse each other of violating a shaky ceasefire. Tensions in the Gulf are escalating, with renewed military friction driving oil prices higher. Subscribe and hit the bell to see how these rising energy costs will actually change your monthly bills in our next video. Can diplomacy still save the Strait of Hormuz, or is a major conflict inevitable? Tell me your thoughts in the comments below.